Okay, and we're back with another video, and this one is a request from David Drucker, who says that he'd love to see me do some videos of Warhammer and 40k, what I like and what I dislike, how I run it, what I change, ignore and include, and maybe even a few ideas about how to get into it for the newcomer. Now this is quite an expansive topic, so I've had to make slightly more notes than usual, and I know I've been trying to cut down on the amount of scripting and notes I do recently, but please forgive me for it in this video. Okay, Warhammer 40,000 is a dystopian future where mankind is ruled by the oppressive Imperium and is surrounded by hostile alien forces on all sides. As the tagline for the original miniatures game by Games Workshop says, in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, there is only war. Now, I'm no scholar of the Warhammer 40k background, and I've probably taken more than a few liberties with it in my game, chopping and changing it, cutting out bits that I don't like and pasting in bits that I do like and giving them more prominence. I have very little to no experience of the expanded background, a la the novels that have been written by the Black Library and various other people, or whatever their fictional imprint is called now. So I may well contradict what is established in those books. Please don't comment and tell me if I do. I'm not concerned with what's in the expanded fiction, although I do hope to get around to reading some of them later. It's simply not a top priority for my game. Okay, so looking at my notes, we have the brief background first for Warhammer 40k. And in the Warhammer 40k background, in the dim and distant past prior to the 41st millennium, a figure who came to be known as the Emperor united the warring feudal lords who battled over Earth, even eventually pushing as far out as reuniting them with the strange tech cults that had withdrawn to Mars and maintained much of the technology that had been lost. He created a number of superhuman Primarchs to aid him in his attempt to reconquer the galaxy in the name of humankind. Now, all would have been well, except for the fact that strange inhuman powers were watching from a parallel dimension known as the Warp. These beings, some call gods, some call demons, recognize the incalculable danger and the potential possibilities inherent in the Primarchs, and whilst the Primarchs were still babies in their cribs, they reached in, plucked them free, and scattered them across the known universe. Using genetic material from the Primarchs, the Emperor was able to engineer a legion of super soldiers known as the Adeptus Astartes, or the Space Marines as they're more commonly known. Now, although these were lesser than the Primarchs, they were still incalculably mighty by normal human standards, and armed with the best weapons and armour that was available at the time. And they led the crusade outwards to rediscover the lost Primarchs. As each Primarch was discovered, they were given control of the legion of Space Marines, or Adeptus Astartes, that bore their genetic material, or their gene seed, as it would later become to be known. However, the forces of chaos, in addition to being mighty, are also corruptive, and whilst they had these infant Primarchs in their grasp, they had worked their corruption. They had slowly sprinkled seeds of dissent, the seeds of treachery, in the minds of some of these infant Primarchs, and most of all in the Primarch Horus, who would later become to be the favourite son of the Emperor. And as he grew up, as he helped the crusade push ever outwards from the earth, they whispered to him that perhaps the Emperor was not worthy of the adoration that Horus bestowed on him. After all, when the conquest had reached a certain point, had the Emperor not turned around and headed back to Earth, leaving the Adeptus Astartes to deal with his dirty work, to clean up the mess? Horus in turn was a very persuasive Primarch, and he whispered this treachery and passed it on to his brother Primarchs, corrupting many of them and culminating in what would later become the civil war known as the Horus Heresy, when the forces of chaos and the Adeptus Astartes would battle, Space Marine turning against Space Marine, loyalists battling traitors for the fate of mankind. Although Horus was eventually defeated, it was at a terrible price. The Primarch Sanguinius, the Angel, Primarch of the Blood Angels Adeptus Astartes chapter, was killed, and the Emperor himself was severely injured, surviving only because he was placed within the archaic Golden Throne, a life support device that maintained the living spark within inside the corpse that his body had become. In the 41st millennium, the Imperium has become a monolithic bureaucracy that slowly grinds its citizens beneath its boot. However, it is somewhat more preferable to the alternative. Mutants, Xenos, witches, the followers of Chaos, and indeed even some of the original traitor Space Marines, the dark mirror to the Adeptus Astartes, still lurk out amongst the stars, waiting to prey on mankind and the Imperium that falters with every day. There is also a danger from uncontrolled mutants, psychics, and the Imperium sends the black ships to round them up so that their souls may be used to feed the hunger of the machinery that sustains the Emperor. The Emperor, who is the shining light of humanity and whose vast psychic power allows the Imperium's ships to travel through the warp and for the Imperium to maintain contact with its far-flung colonies. So that's a brief idea of the background. We now turn to the actual Warhammer 40k roleplay games. Now, as I'm sure you all know, originally Warhammer 40k was a miniatures skirmish / war game produced by Games Workshop, 28mm miniatures. It's still produced today, and I understand it's very popular. Although their Black Library imprint eventually published the first Warhammer RPG for 40k, as far as I'm aware, called Dark Heresy. And later the licensing, as with these things often do, passed on to a company called Fantasy Flight Games, and they've since expanded the range. Currently the RPGs available set in the Warhammer 40k universe, as of the time of recording this video, are Dark Heresy, where the players take on role of assistants to the Inquisition, rooting out heretics and cults wherever they may lurk. Rogue Trader, where players have a writ of trade, allowing them remarkable freedom far above what the average servant of the Imperium would have. They have a ship and they are charged with seeking out fame and fortune amidst the stars, and for the glory of the Imperium, of course. And this is the game that I'm currently running. There's also Deathwatch, where the players play Adeptus Astartes, or Space Marines, drawn from the various different chapters, under the auspices of the organisation known as the Deathwatch, an organisation that is tasked with hunting down the most vile Xenos threats to the Imperium. There is also Black Crusade, which is the first game in which players are expected to play the forces of Chaos, those who oppose the Imperium. And this is a very interesting game because the background fluff in it provides an alternate viewpoint to the rest of the games, which are generally pro-Imperium. There is also Only War, where players take on the role of an Imperial Guard regiment, the standard military force of the Imperium. Now, unlike the Adeptus Astartes, these people aren't equipped with the finest of armour or the finest of weapons, nor are they genetically engineered super soldiers. These are the grunts of the Imperial army. They are conscripts, your average everyday person who has a lasgun slapped into their hand, and they're sent off to die far from their homes on some godforsaken battlefield. Now, this is the game that I have least experience with. However, I have looked over the book and it looks extremely interesting. Now, I think there's a few good and bad points to 40k, and checking my notes, the first one is that there is already a hugely established background. These games have been going for many, many years, and there's also an awful lot of background aside from the dedicated RPG books, that's available for free on the internet via websites such as the Lexiconum and the Warhammer 40k wiki websites. I'll put links down below. However, on the flip side of this can seem a little daunting to the newcomer to the game to have all this background there. It can be a little difficult to know where to start. Now, carrying on with this idea, there's a great sense of history in the game, and there's many and various world-shaking events that are alluded to that have occurred in the past. We've already mentioned the Horus Heresy. There are numerous other events both surrounding that, before that, and after that. And although many of them are shrouded by myth, this does add a very strong sense of depth to the game and a very deep sense of history. I do find it a little bit of a shame that a lot of the fiction released by Games Workshop recently seems intent on exploring these mysteries. I preferred it when there was more stuff that the GM and the players didn't know. It gave you more room to maneuver, and each game would be different. But that's just my personal opinions. I like having some mystery left in a setting. The Warhammer 40k background is instantly familiar to anyone who has played the miniatures game, as I did myself before miniatures became so pricey that you had to practically mortgage your soul in order to pay for an army. And that's a good thing. It gives you an instant familiarity with the setting and allows you to jump straight into the game. And it's fairly easy to port most science fiction concepts to Warhammer 40k by simply giving them a sprinkling of the Gothic effects and style, and there you go, you can run with that straight away. Now, the unfortunate thing is, for those of you who enjoy playing alien races, Warhammer 40,000 is a fairly humano-centric setting. Most of the games, even including Black Crusade, focus on human protagonists. Most of the games also focus on the Imperium, where the mutant, the alien, is despised and abhorred and should be cast out or hunted down by the Inquisition. So anyone who's wanting to play an alien player, Warhammer 40k probably isn't your game. However, in Rogue Trader there are some small concessions made towards playing alien races, because Rogue Traders have somewhat more leeway when it comes to dealing with these forces. Although, as far as I'm aware, the only aliens that are available are Orcish mercenaries and Kroot mercenaries at the present time of recording. Now, the aliens that do oppose the Imperium, however, are great as opponents. They're particularly iconic and very easy to recognise, and that's from the brutally blunt green-skinned orcs with their savage ways and their bioengineered knowledge, to the Tyranids, strange crafted beasts who roam the galaxy, sucking up the biomass of any living thing they come across and using it to manufacture more of their own kind. And even stretching as far as the Eldar, a shattered remnant of a once proud and ancient race, still struggling to cling on to their faded glories and not slip from the galaxy completely. Okay, so that's a brief description. What about the books that make up the Fantasy Flight version of the setting? Well, the Fantasy Flight versions of the game largely use a percentage-based system. Now, I've got no problem with that. I know a lot of games that use percentage systems and are very good. Take, for instance, Call of Cthulhu by Chaosium. That's a great example of how to do a percentage system and do it right. Now, it's possible that this system may change somewhat in the upcoming new release of the Dark Heresy game, a second edition I believe it is, and from what I've heard the rule systems have been tweaked quite significantly. However, I've no personal experience of that, so I can't comment on it. My problem isn't with the use of a percentage system. My problem with the Fantasy Flight rules is there's a vast, in my opinion, number of things which modify or otherwise break the basic rules, skills, powers, feats, whatever you want to call them. They're there, and there's an awful lot of them. And unless you've got a vastly superior memory to myself, which I'm aware there are people out there who do have a vastly superior memory to me, it's not difficult. You're going to spend an awful lot of time flipping through books, looking up the rules exceptions, trying to make notes so that you don't have to look things up in books during a session. Now, this is a personal bugbear of mine, since honestly I'd rather be running a session and concentrating on that than flipping through a book trying to find out what this particular power does or this particular ability does. I like games with clear central mechanics where the rules are a logical offshoot of that central mechanic, rather than having lots of rules which break it for no other reason than simply because they can. If I had to describe the system of Warhammer 40k, I'd say it actually reminds me of an even clunkier version of the D&D system. However, it's a version of the system that hasn't had all the revisions and all the work that's been put into it that D&D's had over the years through many different evolving versions. We've now got to a stage where D&D is a relatively smoothly running game system, and it appears as though that trend is continuing with D&D Next from what I've seen from the playtest material. However, that's not been the case with the Fantasy Flight Games rules. They do seem extremely clunky to me, and I'm sure part of this is only down to my personal opinion, but there you have it. The books are also very expensive for the game, with each line having its own core book costing a considerable amount of money. However, in their favour, they are all coloured hardbacks with very nice illustrations, and even if you don't use the rules out of them, like I don't myself, there's scads of background and setting information that's all really, really interesting and can be used to enrich your game. Personally, if you're on a bit of a tight budget, I'd recommend that you purchase the cheaper PDF versions and use those for your games. It'll cost you far less money to read the PDF and make notes. The hard copies, whilst nice, and I own most of the core books myself, are at the very end of the high-end cost bracket for RPGs. Although they've not yet reached the ridiculous heights of the latest versions of Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay. I hope to be doing a video on Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay later on at some point. But no, they've not reached that ridiculous price level yet. Now, each line consists of a single core book and numerous expansion books dealing with the different power levels and aspects of their relative games. So we have Dark Heresy, which is a low-powered investigative-based game taking place in the underbelly of the Imperium, trying to root out cults and heretics. We have Rogue Trader, which is a slightly more powerful game where you are powerful traders with your own vessels, setting up trade routes and exploring forgotten civilizations and worlds beyond the edge of known space. We have Deathwatch, which is at the higher end of the power spectrum, where the players are all very powerful individually as members of the Adeptus Astartes, and they battle with the severest and most chilling Xenos alien threats to the Imperium. We have Black Crusade, which offers both a low-powered option, where you can play human heretics, or a high-powered option, which is the option of playing the traitor, renegade members of the Adeptus Astartes, the Space Marines, some of which may have even taken part in the original Horus Heresy due to the time-dilating effects of the warp and the Eye of Terror, where most traitor Marines lurk. Then we come to Only War, and as I say, this is the game I have least experience with, but I've had a look through it, and it looks very interesting. The players create an Imperial Guard regiment, picking traits both for themselves and for their regiment as a whole to reflect the world that they come from, which I think is a great idea. And it has a similar flavour to Deathwatch in my opinion, but of a much lower power level since the players aren't Space Marines. Now, what about my own game of Warhammer 40k that I'm currently running? Well, at the moment I'm running a Rogue Trader game set in our own version of the Coronus Expanse. Now this is an area on the rim of known space, which is featured in the Rogue Trader book from Fantasy Flight Games. And initially we started off using the Fantasy Flight Games rules, and then later on switched to using the Fate core rules and my Warhammer 40k hack that I created for it. Again, I'll put a link in the box below. So, why change the rules at all? Well, although initially we started with the Fantasy Flight rules, I felt that the session was getting too bogged down in the minutiae, and that we spent almost as much time flipping through the books and trying to look up rules queries as we did actually running and maintaining the pace of the game. Now, at about the time that I started running this game, Fate and Fate Accelerated were just being released. And having been a fan of Fudge, the the sort of spiritual precursor to Fate, I suppose, I decided to give it a look and found it a great story-based game that enables you to quickly get into a game and run it with a sense of dramatic pacing rather than eternally having to flip through books. And it's all based around the central mechanic, which, as I've said earlier, is one of my preferred rule systems for RPGs. The game also places the spotlight squarely on story elements and elements that are important to the game fiction. Just what I was looking for. Over the course of the next few games, I wrote my Warhammer 40k Fate hack and changed our game over to it, using the excellent Diaspora, which is a science fiction system for Fate, as one of my initial resources. Now, we've pretty much taken the wider background of the 40k universe and some elements of the Coronis Expanse from the Fantasy Flight Games books, Footfall, various planets, etc. And we've largely ignored the rest of it. We've used an adaptation of the star system creation system from Diaspora, along with some elements from Fantasy Flight Games Rogue Trader book Stars of Iniquity, which is quite a decent book, although again still quite pricey, and we've used them to create a series of systems linked by stable passages through warp space. Now, I did this because I wanted to get the players really involved in the stage upon which the game was set, rather than me just standing there on high and passing all of this information down to the players as the GM. I wanted to actually know that they were interested in the different elements of the setting, and what better way to ensure that someone's interested than by asking their opinions and by getting them involved in creating part of that setting. Now, we ended up with many and various different concepts and great plot elements as a result of this, such as systems populated by rogue tech cults, corrupt nobles, space Vikings, and other such interesting stuff. And I know there's at least one system in there that's of interest to each of the players. It's always a great thing, in my opinion, for a game when you start off already knowing that you have something in there that the players are going to enjoy. And anyone planning on running a science fiction game, regardless of the specifics of the genre, whether it's hard sci-fi, cyberpunk, space opera, whatever, I suggest having a look at the Diaspora system creation, and I believe the system reference documents for Diaspora are available for free on the internet. Now, you might be asking yourself, if I'm going to change the rules, why bother with Rogue Trader at all? Well, before I ran Rogue Trader, I ran a short-lived Vampire the Requiem game, which ended up folding because I've run so many vampire games over the years that I was becoming increasingly burnt out with the setting. Not that there's anything wrong with the setting, I love the World of Darkness, but I just run so much of it that I was struggling to think up any original or even new sounding ideas. So I wanted to run something else to give me a break from the World of Darkness, but I still wanted that grim, gritty feel, but really wanted to move as far away from the modern day real world setting of the World of Darkness as I possibly could. Now, I played in a couple of Dark Heresy games and really enjoyed them, and the Warhammer 40k background is a gothic, dark, I suppose semi-apocalyptic future, certainly dystopian. And Rogue Trader had just been released and it looked very interesting, and I could definitely see my group of players enjoying having a city-sized ship under their command. And also this game would give them a lot more freedom than the previous game Dark Heresy would have done. Both myself and my players already had a familiarity with the Warhammer 40k background, which pretty much allowed us to jump straight into it without too much necessary fuss. Now, with my own familiarity with the background and the resources I knew were available for the internet, I had loads of potential plot ideas streaming from me and story ideas for a space travelling style game. Plus, it had been a while since I'd actually run any science fiction, the last being D20 Star Wars, I think, or something like that, and I fancied flexing those particular muscles. So, how would I advise running a Rogue Trader or other 40k game? Well, I would advise focusing on the bits of the setting that appeal to yourself and jettison those elements that don't, or at least shuffle them into the background. If you use an alternate rule system like myself, you don't even really need the Fantasy Flight Games rulebooks. Although I would actually recommend at least looking and considering purchasing the PDFs, since the background material in the majority of them is excellent, and really will spur you to create some interesting plot ideas. I'd suggest setting your game in an area of less well-known space, since this gives you a lot more leeway with what you can do without having to worry about bumping into the canon of the Warhammer 40k universe. Assuming, of course, you're actually bothered about that. If you're not, go crazy. And also, I'd say don't get too hung up on the rules or the fiddlier bits of the setting. The Warhammer 40k universe is one defined by conflict. Again, we come back to that in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium. There is only war. Conflict and larger-than-life characters. Keep this in mind both when helping your players generate their characters and when you're running your game, and to be honest, you won't go far wrong. Now, you can find write-ups of all of my Rogue Trader sessions and the various thoughts on rules adaptations and my hack in my written blog. Again, I'll put a link below. And I will also place some links there for additional sources of background for Warhammer 40k. So to summarise, I'd say that if you're looking for a dark, dystopian, violent future that takes place amidst the rubble of a previously large human empire, if you're looking for a game when the manifest destiny of humankind is at the centre of most of the games, when the alien is something to be feared and abhorred and to be struck out against by the defenders of humanity, if you're looking for a game that has a gothic feel but's taken into the far future, and a game where there is a real sense of history and depth and so much material available for you to plumb for your plots, then Warhammer 40k might just be the background for you for running your roleplay games. And there's certainly no choice of system, both within the Fantasy Flight Games collection of books and outside them. So if you're thinking of running a science fiction game, I'd certainly advise you to give Warhammer 40k a look. Who knows, it might just be your thing. Now, if you have any comments on Warhammer 40k, Warhammer 40k roleplay, maybe you have some suggestions for adapting it to other systems. I'm personally considering a Dungeon World adaptation at the minute. Don't know if anything will come with that, but we shall see. I'll certainly post something up here if I do come up with that. Maybe you've got some thoughts on other systems or adapting them to a Warhammer 40k background. Maybe you're a fan of Diaspora or any of the other games I've mentioned. Either way, if you have anything to say, please put your comments in the comments boxes below. And if you've enjoyed this video, please click on subscribe. I look forward to reading what you've written.